Thank you and welcome to the Path to Intentional Parenting. Have you ever made an important life decision out of fear? Fear about what might happen, what might not happen, fear about what other people might think. Unfortunately, as parents, we often are confronted with opportunities to make our parenting decisions based on fear. And unfortunately, this rarely leads us to what are ultimately going to be the most effective outcomes for our family and for our children. I'd like to share a few experiences of my own fear-based decisions as a parent. I have 5 kids, and I also happen to believe that those 5 kids, for their health and well-being and development, have got to spend a little bit of time outside each day, also for my sanity, so there's that. So a few years back, we lived on a flag lot, which meant there was no traffic. It was a very small community. We were the only, in the immediate area, the only family who had children. So it was our habit to, in the evening, as I prepared dinner and looked out our giant front window to the children riding bikes, playing basketball, whatever, on this safe, secluded flag lot. It was a wonderful routine for them to get outside and for me to prepare dinner. My neighbors, who didn't have children, were worried about this. So they called the police. They called the police a lot. And so the police would come and they would tell me how I needed to install security fences, and I needed to put alarms on my doors, and I needed to get GPS tracker bracelets for my children so that they couldn't escape. The thing that the police officers and the neighbors didn't understand was this was a choice that I was making. I felt like it was important to let my children play outside. This was a decision. They weren't escaping. They weren't neglected. They weren't getting out. We were choosing to allow them outside. Over time, though, I began to develop a record because every time a police officer came out, that went in a file. I now have a file. In the, back in Oregon, I have a record. So it's not a criminal record, but there is a file that the law has about the times that they have come to visit my home. So eventually, I stopped having my children play outside. And my fear about the police coming and potentially even taking away my children overrode my desire to have them play outside. So that's one example. How about this one? Have you ever found yourself in the midst of a toddler tantrum at the grocery store? Right? It's not fun. Again, 5 children, and I grocery shop as infrequently as possible, which means we're going at least 3 weeks in between. So when we do go, it's a bit of an ordeal. So one particular time, my then 3 and 5-year-olds, they had just had it. We grocery shop at a place where we bag our own, so it's a process. And they just couldn't take it. We had our cart full, and we just needed to go through the checkout. Well, they were losing it, screaming, losing it, and my 14-year-old was losing it. So he said, why don't I just take them to the car while you bag the groceries? So he took the youngest 2, went to the car, and the other 2 helped me bag up as quickly as we could. So within minutes, we're heaving our 3 weeks worth of food for 7 people with my other 2 kids. And there at the car, not only my child, who had the keys to keep the air on and the car lock, there was nothing unsafe about it, was a raging, seriously furious stranger. She was screaming at me. She had called the police. She was telling me what a horrible parent I was. She was telling me what a horrible person I was. And when I tried to explain to this woman that my son was 14 and that he could legally care for these children, that there was not a problem here, not to mention that I was only a few minutes bagging the groceries. She didn't care. She wasn't interested. She talked about how I should not even be allowed to have children. I was a horrible person. So now, when I'm confronted with a toddler tantrum in the grocery store, instead of being able to put first the needs of my child, it's time to go, or they're gonna scream anyway, but I just gotta go through this so we don't have to come back and do it again tomorrow, whatever the case may be, always there's a fear in the back of my mind that kind of supersedes the needs of my child about what another person, a stranger, might say or do or think. Which leads me to the idea of grocery store parenting. Grocery store parenting can happen anywhere. It's not necessarily in the grocery store. It can be soccer practice, the PTA, it can be the pediatrician's office, it can be church, wherever you are parenting publicly and somebody else wants to tell you about your child. So sometimes it's well-intentioned people, sometimes not so well-intentioned. It could be neighbors, friends, strangers, or your own parents. So back to the grocery store tantrum. A well-meaning grandmother might say, he needs a nap. You need to get him home and put him to bed. Well, obviously, I want to. That's why I'm hurrying. Do you see the sweat? I want to get him home to bed. We're just got to get through this. And she's trying to help. But I end up feeling judged and criticized. Or maybe a grocery store employee might say, does he need a cookie or a sucker? And sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes it's really, really not helpful. And another bystander might say, well, not sugar. He shouldn't be eating sugar at this time of day, or that's the reason he's freaking out. And still others looking on and maybe not saying something might be thinking, wow, she does not know how to discipline that child. And so in that moment of frustrating parenthood and being overwhelmed, instead of feeling supported, I'm judged, I'm criticized, and ultimately I make my decisions based on fear. And everybody wants to tell us the right way, right? And as parents, of course we want to do it the right way. Of course we're trying to do what's best for our children. We end up imagining that other people know better than we do. And we listen to them. And we think that they're experts and that we are incompetent. We naturally become overwhelmed by all of the expert information that's available to us. And this leads us to make less effective decisions for our children. And even more damaging, I think, is that it lowers our confidence in our ability to be competent parents. That's not good for our kids. So this fear and doubt, this confusion and insecurity, they drive our decisions. But really, when it comes to parenting, aside from some universally accepted standards, there is no right. Obviously, I'm not talking about abuse and neglect. That's an entirely different presentation that we're not going to do today. But there are many different means to the end of effective parenting. Many different approaches can lead us to the outcomes that we're hoping for our children. There is no right. So I'm going to ask you to consider where you're heading as a parent. Parenting with intent requires concentrated, focused decisions about your goals, objectives, and your responsibilities as a parent. Our approaches should be as individual as parents, but also ought to be uniquely tailored to the children that we are parenting. So they truly are infinite.
Are these your kids?
These are my kids.
They're adorable.
Is he karate chopping?
Yeah, ninja. I invite you to consider 3 main objectives as a parent. Now, they can be anything, and yours are likely going to be different than mine. What this does is it gives you a focus and a way to measure your parenting decisions so that you can set aside the fear or the guilt or all the other things that drive us as parents. Now, obviously, I want my kids to graduate from high school. I hope they go to college. I want them to have healthy relationships. You know, there's an infinite list of the things that I hope for my children. But in terms of my job as a parent, I've decided that there are 3 things that I need to do. Again, my 3 things are going to be different than yours, but the principle holds true. So I'm going to share my 3 things, not to coerce you to just choose the same, but to illustrate what I'm talking about. So for me, my first focus as a parent, I need my children to know that they're loved. That's my main focus. That is the main objective of every interaction that I have. I need them to understand that they are lovable. From there, for me, I need them to know that God is real. The faith and belief that have given me such peace and focus in my life, I'm obliged to share it with them. And so my role as a parent becomes teaching them how to discover those things for themselves. That's my second objective as a parent. Finally, I need my children to know that there is help when they need it, because the truth is, I'm gonna mess up. As a parent, I'm gonna mess them up. I'm gonna do my best, but I'm gonna make mistakes. And so are they. And what I need for them to know is that when they find themselves in that moment where they can't do it alone, I need them to develop the attitude that that's okay, and that there's room for that, and that there's help. And I want to teach them how to get help, how to access it. So these are my 3 objectives. And I'll give you some examples of how I have used these objectives to make specific decisions in my life. So this first example, we don't live that life. Or why we don't do sports and how I became okay with that. So I always imagined myself as the quintessential soccer mom, you know, like the car full of kids and everybody's happy and I've got the fruit snacks and the fresh, you know, vegetables and everything healthy and going from activity to activity so my kids are flourishing and they're social and they're developing skills and talents. Well, our life, we don't live that life. Our life is chaos. Our resources are limited, whether it's time or money or distance or whatever it is. That has never been the case. So the kids are constantly coming home with these, you know, can I do the science club? Or, you know, I want to take piano, and I want those things for them. And for quite some time, I allowed that we don't live that life, those limited resources and circumstances, to affect the way I parented because I thought I was doing a terrible job. I thought I was letting them down. I thought I was failing as a mother because I wasn't facilitating every possible opportunity. But thankfully, I had established these 3 measures. So I could ask myself when they'd hand me that flyer of soccer practice, and it's just not an option, and I could consider, is this essential to helping them understand that they're loved? No. Is this really going to teach them that God's real? Not necessarily. And as I measured and weighed all of those constant opportunities by what I had decided was most important as a parent, what it did is not only alleviate my guilt and give me a focused way to make those decisions, but it also facilitated wonderful conversations with my children about the resources and opportunities that we did have. And instead of focusing on all the ways that we couldn't and wouldn't and weren't and aren't enough, we cultivate a culture in our family where we're grateful for what we have. So maybe we can't go to soccer practice, but maybe we can play soccer in the backyard as a family, looking for ways to facilitate those things for them that are maybe a little more outside the box and non-traditional has really benefited us as a family and changed my approach to parenting because of those measures. So another example, my 14-year-old came to us last spring with an application, one of those We Don't Live That Life applications, to become a part of an exchange program to Japan. Okay, so I'm a parent, I was like, we don't live that life. We just don't. There's no way we can afford to send our son to Japan. But he was committed, and it occurred to me in that moment as I measured my 3 questions, I focused on the third, that there is help when we ask for it. And I knew that this was an opportunity. And I didn't want to stand in the way. This is not how this is supposed to be. He was committed to working hard and earning that opportunity. And it occurred to me that as a parent, because my kids are still young and I think that I control their world, but the reality is I don't. Their experiences and their opportunities to learn and grow, they're not all wrapped up in me. They're just not. And this was an opportunity for me to learn that. And I chose to learn that. So I said, go ahead and apply, hoping that he wouldn't get accepted. And instead I got the phone call, oh, this is exactly the kind of kid that we're hoping will sign up for this program. And I was like, so are you going to pay for it? So he fundraised, he worked so hard. He did things with the school, he did things individually, and our whole family was behind him. We all worked hard. I mean, his 12-year-old brother, what an experience for our family, for us to all rally and support him in this effort. It was really wonderful, but in the end, we're a couple weeks shy of that final payment deadline and we haven't made it. He's worked his behind off and we haven't made it. So he made a decision that he was going to reach out to friends and family online, and he set up a GoFundMe. And basically we were going to ask for money. Now again, as a parent, we don't live that life. We don't ask for people to give us money to go to Japan. But this was about him, and he did reach out, and we were absolutely overwhelmed by people's generosity, happily donating to supporting him, from small donations to huge donations, and he went to Japan. He had this life-changing experience, and he flourished. And if I didn't have those measures, I absolutely would have stood in the way of that opportunity. For him, for our family, and for me, to become more humble as a parent and to recognize that sometimes the best way to parent is to let them choose. So, in our effort to do what is best, what is right for our kids, we're often tempted to control. It's natural. Or maybe it's just me, I'm super controlling. Imagine, maybe remember a time that you tried to control a stubborn 4-year-old. Or a teenager. Or maybe you're remembering a time when your parents tried to control you. It's not effective. It doesn't work. Establishing a focus. Oh, actually before I move there, I'll talk about this. Another remarkable benefit of my intention to, my efforts to parent intentionally are that I am much more receptive to recognizing those times when I owe my kids an apology. Because as I become frustrated and yell at them to go get their shoes or clean their room or whatever it is that I'm doing that's contrary to really what I want for them, it's very easy for me to come back to that question. Did that exchange just help my child understand that they're loved? Did that help them know anything about God and how He's real? Did that teach my children that I'm available to help them when they ask? Excuse me. Awesome. If the answer is ever no, then I owe my kids an apology. And I do apologize. A lot. So fear-based or guilt-based parenting, the objective is just to prove that I'm right. So there's not a whole lot of room for apologizing. There's not a lot of room for faltering or even learning and growth. But with this intentional approach, with this measure, am I doing what I decided was most important? I find daily opportunities to apologize to my children. And hopefully, in addition to acknowledging my own weaknesses and trying to overcome them, I'm teaching my children that they're allowed to have weaknesses too. So establishing a standard or 3 focused questions alleviates guilt. Parenting is not about me. It's really not. That's not an effective approach. Guilt is not an effective parenting approach. It's not about the experts. This is not effective. Intentional, focused parenting is about going back to those things that you have determined as most important and then measuring your decisions by those standards. So you might be saying that this approach is too simple. Parenting is really more complicated than just 3 ideas, and sure. Or you might be thinking, but there are experts. There's research, there's evidence about what's effective and what's not. And to that I say absolutely, and embrace it. But there is so much information, and it may or may not apply to your circumstance. So what I'm saying is, having a measure gives you the opportunity to weigh whether or not that expert advice makes sense for what you're doing or is consistent with what your child needs. Let me share some examples of how sometimes expert information can be conflicting or change over time. So safe sleep. Now, I'm not starting a debate, and I'm not encouraging you to not listen to your pediatricians. That's not what I'm about. So right now we understand that the approach to safe sleeping is the ABCs. They need to be alone, they need to be on their back, and they need to be without covers. So this is the current standard for safe sleep. Not that long ago, pediatricians were encouraging people to have their children sleep on their stomachs. And in between these 2 expert opinions, there was a strange period where we were told that they could only be safe if they were on their sides. Well, babies don't naturally stay on their sides, so parents were encouraged to purchase a device so that their child could make it through the night. I think that's absurd. For generations throughout history, infants have not needed that thing, and they no longer need that thing. So I simply am illustrating the point that even the experts, over time, the opinions change or they can conflict. And it's so important to have an internal measure as a parent so that you can weigh what works best for your family. I learned this very personally through the birth of my 3rd child and my only daughter. It was a miraculous birth. It was everything I had ever hoped for. I was able to deliver her naturally. I labored mostly at home and made it to the hospital just in time to deliver. It really was everything I wanted. Unfortunately for the doctors and the nurses, they were nervous that they hadn't been able to monitor me or my daughter because she was born right when we got there. And so they felt that as a precaution it was necessary to go ahead, and the medical term at the time was actually aggressively suction, just in case any fluid or meconium had gotten into her lungs and her stomach. And as a parent I was thinking, yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. But he's the doctor, he's the expert, and I do believe that he had her best interest at heart. He was trying to do what he felt was best to keep her safe and us safe. But as a parent, that didn't seem like it was necessary, and it turned out it wasn't. There wasn't really fluid. Well, this decision was kind of devastating because for the next 6 weeks, it took that long to have my daughter actually have a solid, decent feeding at the breast. 6 weeks. That doesn't sound like very long, but when you're trying to feed a newborn child and you're not sleeping and it feels like life or death, it was horrible. It was so traumatic for her and for me. Thankfully, I had 2 prior breastfeeding experiences, so I knew it was worth the fight. I knew I didn't want to just be like, all right, we'll just do bottles. I knew that it was worth what it took, and it was. And we were ultimately able to teach her how to feed properly and move forward. So understanding what I do about it's okay to need help, I reached out to every expert I could get my hands on. I was talking to the Leche League. I had lactation consultants coming to my home. I was talking to the hospital lactation specialists and my pediatrician. And everybody was telling me that this was sleepy baby syndrome because every time we would bring her to the breast, she would just shut down. And I knew she was experiencing stress as a result of the trauma. I knew it. I knew that's what was going on. Instead, I was being told that I needed to undress her and tickle her feet and maybe get her wet and just kind of wake her up. But the more we did this, the more she shut down. It was like I could watch her eyes become vacant and she just was like, this earth life is not for me. It was quite scary. What was scariest to me at the time was that what I was being told by all of the experts, well-meaning, helpful, supportive experts, was that what I was saying was going on couldn't possibly be what was going on because the baby is comforted at the breast and they have an instinct to go there and that's what they want and that will be comforting. The thing is, her instinct was interfered with. So this isn't a presentation on aggressive sectioning. It's simply to say, as a mother, I knew what was going on. 2 months after that experience, the research came out to say that aggressive sectioning does in fact lead to the exact behaviors that we were contending with. Proof, scientific proof of what I already knew as a mother. So the evidence and the research, it's helpful. look to it, but use your internal guide and use your 3 measures to determine what you actually need to do for your parents. For your children as a parent. Stephanie shared with me and gave me permission to go ahead and tell this other story, which I think is right in line with what we're talking about. Her daughter had the opportunity to attend girls' camp, which she was excited about. She wanted to participate. She just didn't want to spend the night. She wasn't comfortable being away from home, the dark, whatever it was, she just didn't want to. Well, her parents were totally happy to pick her up at night and bring her back in the morning so that she could experience all that was going to be good for her and not miss anything, but not have to go through this thing that wasn't great for her. Well, the leaders and the advisors at the camp at that time felt that it would be better for her to stay. And that first evening, they made a phone call to the parents, and throughout the conversation, eventually persuaded the parents that it would be good for her, that she should be away from home, that she shouldn't miss anything, whatever. And so they did. Now, this isn't a devastating story. It's not a big deal. She stayed. But that little girl, she didn't sleep a wink. And guess what? Neither did her parents. So how is that good? Who is that serving? What objective is that? If the point of girls' camp is to have her have positive experiences, was that achieved? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe that was even maybe a little bit interfered with because somebody else felt that they knew better than the parents. So she continued, it's fine, everybody's fine, she moved on, but you better believe those parents picked up that daughter every night thereafter. So I'm not saying that we don't listen to the experts. Of course, listen to the experts. There is so much, there's a wealth of information available to us, and what a blessing that is. But it can become overwhelming, and as we saw, sometimes contradictory. So what I'm suggesting is that you are the expert of your parent, of your child. When it comes to your child, you are the expert. It is good, right, and reasonable to seek help in education as a parent, but you determine the focus. And as needed, you can change that focus based on your own experiences and as you gain insight. The point is to actively choose. Ultimately, only you know what is best for your child. So I encourage you, become an intentional parent.